The wind tearing across the mouth of the Shigans Valley was a living thing, a relentless force that carried the grit of a continent and the chill of the high altitudes. It was a wind that could steal your breath and your warmth, a wind that made the already impossible shot a fool's errand. At 3,247 meters, the air was thin, the physics of a bullet's flight path distorted by a lack of oxygen and the Earth's own curvature. For most snipers, it was a death sentence to even attempt a shot at this range. For Senior Chief James Slate Morrison, it was just another Tuesday. Slate lay prone on a rocky outcrop, his body molded to the frozen earth. The ghillie suit that clung to his frame was a tapestry of local scrub and dust, rendering him invisible against the gray-brown landscape. His eye was pressed to the scope of his custom .338 Lapua Magnum by a rifle he called Vera. The scope's reticle was a complex spiderweb of holdovers and windage marks, each line a calculation in an equation of death. He was watching a cave complex on the opposite side of the canyon, a known staging point for a high-value terrorist leader known as the Mullah. The intel was solid. The Mullah was inside, meeting with his top lieutenants. The shot was the problem. The target was deep in the cave's mouth, a dark maw against the rock face. Slate wasn't waiting for the man to step out into the light. That would be too easy. He was waiting for a silhouette to pass a specific patch of lighter rock just inside the entrance, a spot where the ambient light from the canyon floor would be just enough to define a target. It was a shot that defied logic. The bullet would be in the air for over 4 seconds. In that time, the wind could gust, the target could move. The Coriolis effect, the very rotation of the Earth, could drag the round off by several feet. His spotter, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Doc Reynolds, lay beside him, a high-powered spotting scope trained on the same patch of darkness. Doc was the calm to Slate's focused intensity, a man of few words whose observations were always precise. "Winds steady at 12 knots, full value left to right," Doc murmured, his voice barely a whisper against the wind's howl. Temperature's dropped another degree. Your shot's going to go high and left if you don't compensate." "I've got it," Slate replied, his voice a low rumble. His gloved fingers made micro-adjustments to the turrets on his scope. Click, click, click. Each click was a minute of angle, a fraction of an inch of adjustment at this distance that translated to feet on the target. He breathed, a slow and rhythmic cycle that emptied his mind of everything but the reticle and the dark space where a man would soon appear. This was the part of the job he was built for. The stillness, the waiting, the absolute certainty in the face of overwhelming chaos. But as he lay there, a part of his mind, the part he couldn't completely silence, drifted. Not to his wife or kids back in Virginia Beach. That was a door he kept firmly shut on a mission. It drifted to another time, another place, and another sniper, a ghost from his past. Her name was Katerina Volkov. He'd met her 10 years ago at a joint multinational special forces training exercise in the scorching heat of the Jordanian desert. She was a sniper with a Russian Spetsnaz unit, a rarity in a world dominated by men. She was tall and lean, with eyes the color of the Siberian ice, and a braid of honey-blonde hair that she kept tucked under her boonie hat. She wasn't just good. She was a prodigy. She could calculate wind speed by the way dust devils formed, judge distance by the shimmer of heat haze, and shoot with a mechanical precision that bordered on the supernatural. They had been pitted against each other in a final exercise, a 2-day simulated sniper hunt across a sprawling desert wadi. It was a game of cat and mouse played at immense distances, a test of field craft, patience, and nerve. Slate, with his decade of experience and combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, I was confident. But Katya, as everyone called her, was something else. She anticipated his moves, laid traps with dummy positions, and once, memorably, put a simulated round so close to his position that the paint splatter on the rocks around him would have been fatal had it been real. He never even saw her. On the second night, with the exercise nearly over and both declared alive, he found her. She had made a single, fatal error, a faint reflection of starlight off the lens of her scope, and he had her dead to rights. But instead of taking the simulated kill, he had simply waited. He watched her for an hour, admiring her absolute stillness, her complete integration with the landscape. Finally, he made a soft bird call, the signal to break the exercise. She had frozen, then slowly turned her head. Even in the dim light, he saw the flash of surprise in her eyes before they narrowed with respect. They had met in the no man's land between their positions, and instead of exchanging tactics, they had shared a flask of water and sat beneath a canopy of 1,000,000,000 stars. They talked for hours, about pressure, about the burden of the perfect shot, about the silence that followed a kill. They were two people from opposite sides of a fading Cold War, yet in that moment, they were simply two souls who understood a solitude that few others could fathom. It was a connection forged in the crucible of shared skill. A sharp nudge from Doc ripped him back to the present. Contact! Movement in the cave! Slate's world narrowed again. A figure, shrouded in dark robes, moved into the scope's field. It paused just at the edge of the lighter rock. It was a man, consulting with someone just out of sight. The mullah. Slate's finger rested on the trigger, feeling the minute take-up of the mechanism. He began the final, critical phase of his breathing. Inhale, exhale, partial inhale, hold. And then, the world exploded. It wasn't from their position. It was from somewhere else, high on the opposite ridge, a flash of light and a sound like a thunderclap that rolled across the canyon a full second after the bullet had already passed. Slate and Doc flinched, a purely involuntary reaction. Through his scope, Slate saw the figure in the cave mouth crumple, not from his shot, but from the impact of another round. The mullah was down, a spray of dark crimson on the rock behind him. "Man, what the hell? Who else is in the AO?" Doc hissed, his voice laced with a rare note of panic. "That shot was miles away. There's no one else. No call sign has that authority." Slate didn't answer. He was already scanning the opposite rim, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from the shock of the ambush, but from a dawning, impossible recognition. He knew that sound. Not the caliber, but the timing. The way the crack of the bullet and the thunder of the report were so far apart. And the shooter was at an insane distance. He swept his scope across the far ridge, over jagged peaks and snow-dusted ledges, until he found it. A flicker, not of movement, but of something being out of place. A shadow that was too sharp, a patch of snow that didn't quite belong. Then, a glint. The unmistakable brief flash of a high-power rifle scope catching the low sun. It was there and gone in a second, but he saw it, and in that instant, he knew. And he knew the patience it took to find that position. He knew the skill it took to calculate a shot from that angle, at that distance, through that wind. He knew the balls it took to take it, stealing the target from under the nose of a U.S. Navy SEAL team. It was a signature, a calling card, a message. The chaos in his earpiece was immediate. Command was screaming, demanding to know who had fired. Other members of his team, positioned further down the canyon, were reporting confusion, thinking the shot had come from Slate. But Slate was silent. He kept his eye on the scope, watching the far ridge. He saw the shadow shift, resolve itself into a human form. For a moment the figure stood, a tiny, almost indistinguishable speck against the vastness of the mountain. Then it raised an arm. It wasn't a wave, it wasn't a gesture of triumph, it was a simple, open-handed salute, a soldier's acknowledgement to another. Doc saw it too. Slate, what the hell is that? Who is that? Slate finally lowered his head from the rifle, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Awe, frustration, and a deep, unsettling respect. I don't know who she works for now, he said, his voice a low rasp. But I know who she is. The mission was a success. The mullah was dead. But for Slate, the questions were just beginning. The extraction helicopter ride back to the forward operating base was a blur of debriefings and adrenaline come-downs. He answered the questions robotically, confirming he did not fire, confirming he saw a secondary shooter, estimating the distance of the shot based on the sound delay. He gave the official story. He did not give them her name. He spent the next 48 hours in a state of hyper-focused obsession. He pulled satellite imagery of the far ridge, the one she had fired from. He used mapping software to calculate the distance. His initial estimate was wrong. It was worse than he thought. From her position to the cave mouth was 3,247 meters. Over 2 miles, the exact same distance he had been set up for. The shot she made was the one he had been trying to make, the one everyone said was impossible. And she had executed it perfectly, under the same conditions, with the added pressure of snatching it from a Tier 1 U.S. unit. He ran the ballistics in his head over and over. At that range, the bullet would have dropped hundreds of feet. Or she would have been aiming at a point in the sky, holding over the target by an astronomical amount. The wind alone could have shifted the round by dozens of feet. The Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation under the bullet's long flight, was no longer a theoretical adjustment. It was a primary factor. It was a shot of almost mythical proportions. It was a shot that put him and every other sniper he knew in the shade. Then came the data. And the QRF team that swept the far ridge found the position. It was a masterclass in fieldcraft, a natural overhang of rock shielded from the wind. A shallow depression lined with a thermal blanket where she had lain, perfectly camouflaged, possibly for days. And they found the shell casing. It wasn't for a .338 Lapua, the standard for long-range military sniping. It was for a massive .50 caliber round, but one that was unfamiliar to their techs. Slate knew what it was. It was a Russian 12.7 millimeter round, likely fired from a custom-built single-shot rifle designed for extreme ranges. It was a weapon for one purpose only, to make the impossible shot. He was in his bunk that night, the casing in his hand, turning it over and over. The others were asleep, or trying to be. The mission was done. They were going home in 2 days. But for Slate, the mission felt like it had just pivoted into a whole new personal theater of war. A soft knock came at his door. And before he could answer, a grunt from his team, a young man named Riley, stuck his head in. "Sir, there's someone here to see you from the agency, says it's urgent." Slate frowned. The CIA liaison at the base was a weaselly man named Phelps. He didn't knock, he barged. This felt different. He pulled on his boots and followed Riley to a small, windowless briefing room. Inside, standing with her back to him, was a woman. She was wearing a dark civilian jacket and had her hair pulled back. She turned as he entered. It wasn't Katia. It was a woman he didn't recognize, with sharp features and tired eyes. She flashed a badge. "Senior Chief Morrison, I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Please, sit down." He remained standing. "I've already been debriefed." "This isn't a debrief. It's a consultation." She gestured to a tablet on the table. On it was a grainy black and white satellite image. It was the ridge, and a red circle was drawn around the spot where the sniper had lain. "We've identified the shooter. Her name is Katerina Volkov, former Spetsnaz, now an unaffiliated contractor of the highest order. We've been tracking her for 3 years. She's a ghost. She works for the highest bidder, but always on jobs that are personal, ideological. This wasn't a contract kill, Senior Chief. The mullah was a target of mutual interest to several agencies. But for her, this was a message. Slate's jaw tightened. He kept his face blank. A message to who? The DIA agent looked him dead in the eye. To you. We have chatter, signals intelligence. She's been asking questions about you for months. Your assignments, your methods. She set this up. She knew you'd be here. She knew you had the shot, and she took it from you. She proved she could do what you couldn't. The words were a calculated provocation, but Slate didn't rise to it. He just stared at the image. The message wasn't about dominance, as the agent thought. It was something else. It was a reminder, a connection. In a world of chaos and disposable violence, she had reached across a decade and a canyon to remind him of the one person who truly understood the weight of the crosshairs. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "We want you to find her. Talk to her. You have a history. You might be the only one who can get close." "She's a ghost. You just said so yourself." "We have a lead. A possible next target, one that might appeal to her sensibilities. And we think she'll make contact with you again before she takes the shot. You're the bait, Senior Chief. We want you to go back in the field." Slate looked from the agent's face back to the satellite image. He thought of the salute, a gesture of respect between warriors. He thought of the impossible shot, a feat of skill that bordered on art. He thought of the desert night, years ago, and the understanding he had found in the eyes of a stranger. He wasn't bait. He was the only person in the world she might actually talk to, and he needed to know why. Why the message? Why now? The questions that had started in the canyon were now a roar in his mind. He picked up the shell casing from the table, the one she had left behind. It was cool and heavy in his palm. "I'm not your bait," he said, his voice firm. "But I'll find her. On my terms." The agent nodded, a flicker of something, satisfaction, respect, in her eyes. She pushed a folder across the table. "Her next probable location. It's not going to be easy." Slate opened the folder. Inside was a photo of a sprawling, ancient city nestled in a green valley, surrounded by snow-capped peaks. The caption read, "Srinagar, Indian-administered Kashmir. A new canyon, a new impossible shot, and a ghost who was waiting for him." The game was far from over. It had only just begun.